General report found out that some schools are not even aware of this report, that 2008 report on fires. So there's no fire assembly, there's no exit point, there's distance between the sleeping beds are not there, grails are still on the same place they used to be. Who is sleeping on the job here?
I think we start with government. The buck will stop with the government and the Ministry of Education. If as a principal I am not aware of the existence of a safety manual, then I'm not fit to be the principal. And the government ought to give me other duties and place me in a situation where I will be aware of what is required. So the government, as Janet has spoken, is that the minister has lost touch. The PS has lost touch. The county directors have lost touch. And their priorities are upside down. You will see minister flying to Kisumu and going to Nyalenda and visiting one school, and instead of even visiting the dormitory, issuing threats from Nyalenda and expecting that those threats will serve Loitoktok and other parts of the country. We have county directors of education, we have sub-county directors, we have curriculum support officers in every village. How often do they visit the schools for the purpose for which they were retained in those jobs? Do they check whether we have the school manuals? Do they even check whether the school heads have constituted committees towards the implementation of those safety manuals? So I think the ministry is not supervising basic education in a manner that is anticipated by both policy and by law. Yeah. They are easy to harass private schools because they know private schools, since they are in business partly, they are likely to part with bribes. They cannot harass a public school to get money that they have not given. But immediately the government disburses money to public schools, you will see these county directors in every school to collect bribes. And it's like part of their duty as administrators. And then secondly, we just need to perhaps empower teachers, empower the principals, and tell the principals you have a right to complain. This idea that if you are employed by government, you cannot complain about government is draconian. Every person has a right to speak out if things are not wrong. Yeah. We have had principals who tell off these county directors, even though they are transferred and taken to perhaps areas that are considered to be a punishment, they stand out for speaking against government excesses. Okay. The rate at which the Ministry of Education through its agencies is collecting bribes, both from public and private schools, and letting schools behave the way they want is very alarming. Right. So unless we get a minister who is on the ground, a minister who can implement policies and who can make the system function, we are not going to have a schools. Yeah. If as a principal I'm giving out bribes, what moral authority do you have to come to me and say, Mwalimu, you have not implemented this? And since all principals are literally being coerced into giving bribes to education officials, there is no supervision going on. You cannot supervise a person from whom you're getting bribes. Yeah.
Mwalimu, is that the situation? Because I see, you know, one of the reports, on the same report actually, some schools exceeded the number in the registration certificate. Are the principal's hands tied?
And nothing was done, and no report has been given about that. So he can never be any wrong. The issue of bribes are there, and I should speak about this, that when an education officer enters a school, in fact I know even the figures being given for a second school is slightly higher than a primary school. And it's true. I have to speak for these teachers. School? No, I'll not quote the figures. Talk to me later. But I know the figures. So the issue of bribing is also attached to the issue of intimidation. And I think veteran principal Were has just talked to me now. And she's saying that the principals don't have space, like you say, to complain. And therefore they can never have the ownership of the processes they are undertaking. And that is not good for the education sector. So, and I was watching Kahindimuli yesterday, and you were here. How many times did he tell you I'm not answering this question? Did you know why he told you I'm not answering that question?
Because he doesn't speak.
I can answer those questions. Because, you know, if he says anything, he'll be reprimanded by the employer and reprimanded by the ministry, even if he knows the things are wrong. But so there is need now mitigation. There is need for the Minister of Education, for the Teacher Service Commission, to allow ventilation space, to do a critique. The principals to do a critique to both the ministry and the Teacher Service Commission, so that they can even improve on their working. Otherwise, as it is now, those principals are people who are very shy, they cannot speak, they are intimidated, and they have to follow policy as it is, whether it's good or bad, or even if there are any wrongs in schools, they will not speak about them publicly. Yeah. Because immediately you speak, you'll be called and asked, how did you get into this? So those are some of the issues in the sector. Yeah. But you are basically talking about the issue of infrastructure, yes, and the manual. And I liked what Ma'am Janet brought out, but I want to attack her. When we were here in 2016, she was talking for government. Yeah. But I'm happy you are not. You are very, very serious now. And I'm just so proud of this. But don't reply me now. You reply me later. Now the issue of those, what the report was giving. You know, we have so many reports, apart from the report that was given by the Auditor General. We have several other reports, including the 2008 report, which Janet also talked about. But all these reports are on the shelves. You know, when we give the reports, they must have an attachment of money from the government coffers through Parliament to actually implement the reports. So once we don't attach the report to a budget to give to the schools to implement, then it's useless. Because how will it be implemented? There are many schools that have had those doors not opening out, not opening in. And I think also that report basically dealt with the safety nets that could allow students to move quickly. Yes. But there was no budget that was attached to it. So schools grapple on how to actualize that, given that also school fees is a ping-pong game between the ministry and the school administrators. So I think every report given must have a budget line. Yeah. But did it require the Auditor General to do that? They are the same things we are speaking about here, and nobody can implement. The principals could have spoken about them, nobody implements. The unions speak about these things every day. So the excitement that the Auditor General was giving a report is just for you guys in the media to roll your machines. But otherwise, these issues are the same issues that are within the knowledge of everyone, that there's congestion in schools, there are daycares that go up to 3, and sooner or later they are making 4 daycares to accommodate those students. Hey, you, those who want boarding schools, so that we just put those children there and they will not be in very safe places.
You're saying there's a standard for bribes. I'm still stuck on that. There's a standard measure for bribes for schools.
Yes, so that I can answer. If he's afraid of answering, that I can answer. And I hope the ministry is watching. Trevor, there is a county director in this country whose work every term is to walk from every institution, and by the end of the term, he has completed all the secondary schools. And if it's a national school, the measure of bribe is about 30,000 for national boarding school. If it is an extra county school, it's 20,000. If it is a county school, it is 10,000. And for day schools, the cut is 5,000. And this gentleman, and he's not alone, he is with colleagues in other counties. But this one, I can adduce evidence to it, because principals complain to people like us who can talk on national television. The person comes, even when he wants to travel to his home village, he must be certain school and tell the principal, I am going home. He has communicated in parables. So if he is going home, then you know that you have to fund the trip home. So this fella, and many of them do this, have times to collect bribes from school A, and in these expansive counties, by the time you are done collecting bribes in the entire county, the term has come to an end. And when term 2 begins, you begin collecting bribes. So that is something that is happening, and we can substantiate.
So I think a professional has now given you the answer.
Yeah, you know, but some of these things, I mean, like the audit report says 22 out of 42 classrooms doors open inwards. That is something a principal can fix, no?
Again, it comes to the issue of financing, you know, and I think Modoni and I have discussed this, I can't remember where, but we've talked about how outside the cities, schools actually rely on the communities for financing. If the initial, sometimes even the land. And I think during Kaimenyi's time, an audit of school lands was held, and it was found that many people have donated land to build public schools, but the transfers have never been done. You know, the families that own the land have never released the land. The churches that own the land have never released the land. And that reliance on communities to build school perhaps is part of how we find ourselves where we are. Because I think the only discussion we can have with firmness is cities like here in Nairobi, where the then council used to own all the schools and therefore had the power to build the schools, and we can see the stagnation there. But outside these cities, it is communities that build schools, and that in itself is a model for increasing access that needs a different discussion altogether. Because yes, fine, communities have a very big stake, but at what point does then the state take over and own that infrastructure? When you look at most day schools, most community schools, most church schools, be they public or private, there's that underlying factor of how the school actually came to be. And this is historical in Kenya. You know, the privateness of land in education is historical. It has been one of the things that perhaps needs a very different discussion on how to hand over land. In my opinion, the way police stations are set up in communities is the model to go for. The government never takes over a police station unless the land is transferred to it. But for us, because children are so precious to all of us, immediately a school is set up and it is said to be public, you find the Teacher Service Commission immediately, if the population is critical, they immediately start sending teachers and owning the school, but there is no underlying structure to own that school and therefore fund it. So there is a lot of schools that have interesting registrations where you can find the school is public, the land is private. And we've seen some of the drama play out in the cities where that has happened.
All right.
That's historical.
Yes, it is.
The modern schools may not have that particular, the recent schools may not have that particular scenario because there are certain requirements for registering a school, including a land, availability of land, the size of land, and the title deed. But the schools being affected, which Madam has talked about, are the old schools which were either through donations, churches, or individuals who donated. And that's where we have the challenge. But I wanted to say this, which I thought was also very critical, from one of our former principals, that is Minish, is in Nanyuki now. When we talk about the issue of boarding, he's wondering who really builds the boarding facilities in schools? Who really builds? Have you ever asked yourself that, Mr. Major? Who builds? Do you know that government does not fund building of hostels? It is supposed to be the parents themselves. Are you aware that the boarding institution within schools is a private entity by parents within a school? Food for thought in the next discussion.
All right.
I want
to give you a minute each for closing remarks, and it's just strictly 1 minute. Yes, but you wanted to make some statement.
I think the time has come that we must work together, both public and private. We have a PPP structure in place within our laws, and it needs to be implemented in the education sector so that we can use all available infrastructure to ease the pressure in education. Nairobi County actually attempted it at one point by capitating early years children because it saw that there was a problem with, they couldn't educate children. So we need to have that final discussion, especially as we are rolling out CBC, and our population is growing at such a rate, 1 million children being born every year. We need to be able to sit all of us at a table and say, look, this is what we have. How can we partner and make sure that children are learning in environments that are what all of us believe in. And then we harmonize regulation around that. The regulatory framework around education for us in the private sector with double regulation from the TSC and the Ministry of Education is only causing problems. It is not solving any problems.
All right. 1 minute, Chesa.
There is a clarification from one principal who tells me that, dear Bwana Chesa, for national schools in our county, they have to give 30,000 the director, extra county 20,000, county 10, but day school, it depends on population, but not less than 5,000. Having said that, it is our collective responsibility as stakeholders in this education sector to help the sector stand. Let government support schools through adequate funding, let government support schools through adequate supervision, and let us partner with stakeholders in implementing what is good for the schools. And I must bring out the role of members of parliament. Actually, the new institutions, the brand brand new institutions that Janet was talking about, if they've been put in place, then they've been put in place by members of parliament through CDF. Okay. And we must support that there should be an increase in CDF allocation, because now the members seem to be more closer to the education sector than even the government itself. And Teso South turns out, and people can do a case study of Teso South under Honorable Mary Emase when she was MP, the number of schools she put up, and perhaps in Navaholo under the current government with Emmanuel Wangwe. We can benchmark from these good examples and develop and make the sector stand. Okay,
Mudori, 1 minute.
We're still on the audit report, and for us, I think we would want to see heads rolling. Really, it's funny that there's so many thousands of schools that none has been closed down for any anomaly. I think is a discussion I would really want, because really, Kenyan sign, the president is the person we are speaking about here. The Ministry of Education is so serious. 3 things need to happen. Number 1, let's get down to the audit report and let's have the Ministry of Education answering 1 or 2 questions. And number 2, the Ministry of Education should make public the clear or Molo report, so that then people can begin to know what are these underlying issues and what can be done. And finally, and most significant, can the ministry get down to a policy on internal examinations in schools? Because schools are randomly issuing exams every other day, and the ministry is not regulating how those exams are done. There are sources of pressure, both to the parents, to finance, and also to the children, to just keep looking at the examinations. So a policy of internal examinations at school level would really go a long way.
All right.
We've forgotten the teacher. That teachers are not well remunerated. And the last CBA we signed had no money for teachers, courtesy of COVID. And if the cause of also banning of schools is related to COVID, I also think the motivation of teachers is very important. The government must allocate money to actually keep its promise of adding the salaries of teachers and other emoluments after 4 years or 3 years as per the CBA. So let's motivate the teachers. Where we are now, the teachers will just teach and go away. They are not motivated.
All right. Let me bring up the feedback and see what you're saying finally here on this conversation. First up, Karsef says that there are problems in our schools because of lack of goodwill from all sectors. Do you know how the school administrations treat parents like trash? Just like how some they treat the students. Parents ask why, and the admin victimize both parents and student. Okay? Jackson says, I always wonder, the same panel underwent ruthless discipline institutions while they were in their school days. Now they're telling us how to be sympathetic with the indiscipline. Okay. Jacob Abere says, the long-time solution approach to unrest needs to be looked item by item. Example, why do students protest against head teachers, poor food quality, sport activities, and sleeping time? And lastly, issue of Illuminati needs to be addressed because we have seen students possessed. Okay. Onguso says, I think we are giving in to pressure from the students. The midterm break wasn't supposed to happen just because the students are banning the dormitories. Drastic measures have to be taken to ensure the perpetrators are brought into account. Drop the children's right and keep Boko, EJ. Okay? James says, unfortunately, these schools of ours have got everyone focused on the school fees and forgetting even to have a fire assembly point. Visit most of these schools, they don't have a fire exit signs, but these so-called teachers, Leo, are asking for fees. It is so unfortunate. It's totally unacceptable for students to use schools as practicing grounds for criminal activities. Those found culpable of such heinous acts should be locked behind bars and denied access to certificates of good conduct. Adera Jacob says, I still don't believe students are the ones banning schools. We must cast our net wider. Capitation of school fees is an idea many teachers don't like. Why only public schools? George from Migori says, 100% transition is not working. The very weak students should transit to tertiary institutions to ease congestion in secondary schools. Kiplimo Timothy, what happens when we live in a society where education is no longer a lucrative venture? Students have role models who are graduates but tamarking for years without a job. Children are demotivated. Hard work isn't rewarding. Pam Vihiga says, the major reason of unrest in our schools is because of too much pressure put on the students to perform. The set targets per student is tormenting them. Removing boarding schools won't help because most students watapotelea barabarani tu. Let boardings be. All right. All right, thank you for that Conversation, it's been interesting. Umboko Milemba, Chairperson, Kupet Kennedy Chesa, Lecturer and Education Expert, Janet Mudhoni Uko, CEC Education, Nairobi County, and Mudeu Kasanga, Chair, Kenya Private Schools Association. Thank you so much for making time this morning. I hope this is a conversation we won't have to have again, but I'm sure my hopes will be dashed very soon. We'll still have this conversation. All right, thank you so much for having made time for Daybreak. My name is Trevor Mbije. It's always a pleasure having you with us coming